I called my kids on the Sunday evening in November. That's how I always did it, Sunday evenings. For 34 years, it was the rhythm of our family. Dinner, dishes, a little television, and then the phone calls that kept everyone connected. Even after the kids were grown and gone, I kept the habit. Christine in Phoenix, Mark in Atlanta, Emily right here in Raleigh. Sunday evenings, like clockwork. I knew they'd be surprised. I knew there'd be questions. I had prepared for that. What I had not prepared for was Christine's silence, that particular kind of silence that stretches out just long enough to tell you something has gone wrong. And I had not prepared for Mark's voice, tight and careful, like he was trying very hard not to say the first thing that came to mind. And I had not prepared for Emily, my youngest, who simply started to cry, not from happiness. I want to tell you how I got to that Sunday phone call. Because if you only hear about that evening, you might think I did something reckless. And I need you to understand that what I did was actually the least reckless thing I had done in years. My husband Dennis died 5 years ago, 2 weeks before his 59th birthday. Heart attack. He was at the grocery store. He was reaching for a box of cereal, the same cereal he had eaten every morning for 20 years, and that was it. The paramedics told me later that it was very fast. I have held on to that on the harder nights. I have told myself it was a mercy, that he didn't suffer, that he didn't have time to be afraid. Dennis and I were married for 29 years. We met when we were in our late 20s, both of us working in the same office building in downtown Raleigh. He was in accounting. I was an office manager for a law floor on the 4th floor. We got married after 2 years of dating, bought a house in the suburbs, had Christine, then Mark, then Emily. Dennis coached Little League for 6 years. I organized the neighborhood 4th of July block party every summer for longer than I can remember. We were, by any reasonable measure, a normal American family living a normal American life. I want to be honest with you, the way I have learned to be honest with myself these past few years. Dennis was a good man. He was steady and responsible and faithful. He never raised his voice. He never missed a school event. He worked hard and came home every night, and he loved his children in the quiet, practical way that some men love, not with big declarations, but with the 1,000 small acts of showing up. But our marriage was not easy. It was not unhappy. I want to be clear about that. But it was not easy. We were very different people who had built a life together through effort and will and the shared project of raising 3 children. When the children grew up and left, we found ourselves looking at each other across the dinner table sometimes with a kind of polite uncertainty, like two people who have been traveling together for a very long time and have only just realized they never agreed on a destination. We were working on it in the years before he died. I believe that. We were slowly, carefully learning how to be just the two of us again. And then we ran out of time. The first year after Dennis died, I barely remember. I moved through it the way you move through fog, one step and then another, without being able to see very far ahead. The second year was harder in some ways because by then everyone had stopped checking in quite so often, and the reality of the thing had fully arrived. I sold the house. I bought a smaller one, a little 2-bedroom on a quiet street with a front porch I liked. I learned to cook for one. I learned to sleep in the middle of the bed. By the 3rd and 4th year, I had built something resembling a life. I had a garden. I had a book club. I had Sunday phone calls with my children. I was not unhappy. But I was also not fully alive, if that makes any sense. I was existing inside the shape of a life rather than actually living one. My friend Patty is the one who suggested the dance class. Patty has been my closest friend for over 20 years. She is the kind of woman who tries things, who signs up for things and goes places and drags you along when she decides you need dragging. In February, 2 years ago, she called me and said there was a beginner ballroom class at the community center on Wednesday evenings, and she needed a partner to go with her. I said I didn't want to go. She said that was exactly why I should. I went. I wore the wrong shoes and stepped on my own feet twice in the first 10 minutes and felt completely ridiculous. And then the instructor paired me with a man named Ron. Ron Calloway was 63 years old at the time, retired high school history teacher, widower. His wife Carol had passed away 3 years earlier after a long illness. He was tall, a little gray at the temples, with a kind of calm that comes not from not caring, but from having already been through enough that small things no longer bother him. He was not a particularly good dancer either, which helped. We fumbled through that first class together with the same cheerful incompetence, and when it was over, we both laughed about it, standing by the door putting on our coats. He said, "Same time next Wednesday?" I said yes. We danced together every Wednesday for 8 months. I want you to understand what those 8 months were, because they were not what you might imagine. It was not a whirlwind. It was not a romance from a movie. It was two older people who had already had full lives and full losses, learning each other slowly, the way you learn a place when you walk it every day, a little more revealed each time, nothing rushed. We talked during class, between songs, during the breaks. We talked about our children and our late spouses and the towns we'd grown up in. Ron was from a small town in Virginia and had a dry, unhurried sense of humor that took me a few weeks to fully appreciate. He asked me questions and actually listened to the answers. He remembered things I had said the week before. These sound like small things. They are not small things. In May, he asked me to have coffee after class. We sat in a diner around the corner for 2 hours and talked about everything and nothing. In June, he took me to a concert in the park, outdoor orchestra, blanket on the grass, thermos of tea. In August, I told Patty that I thought I might be in love with him, and she looked at me with an expression that said she had known for months and had been waiting for me to catch up. We took a weekend trip to Savannah in September. I didn't tell my children, not because I was hiding it, but because I wasn't ready to explain something I was still understanding myself. And then, on a quiet Thursday evening in October, we were sitting on Ron's back porch. The weather had finally turned, and there was that particular autumn feeling in the air, that mix of warmth and chill that I have always loved. He had made dinner. We were drinking wine and watching the last of the light leave the sky. He said, "Barbara, I know we haven't been doing this very long, and I'm not trying to rush anything." He paused for a moment, and then he said, "But I'm 65 years old, and I've already learned what it feels like to run out of time with someone, and I don't want to do that again." He asked me to marry him. No restaurant, no ring box produced dramatically from a pocket, just two people on a porch in the October dark, being honest with each other about what they wanted. I said yes before he finished the sentence. I sat there for an hour afterward, just the two of us, not talking much, and I felt something I had almost forgotten the feeling of. Not giddiness, not the electricity of new love, something quieter and more solid than that, something that felt, more than anything else, like being exactly where you are supposed to be. On Sunday, I called my children. Christine was first. She is the oldest, the most measured, the one who thinks before she speaks. When I told her, she was quiet for what felt like a very long time. Then she said, "Mom, are you sure about this? 8 months is..." And she stopped herself and started again. "I just want to make sure you've really thought it through." I told her I had. Mark was less careful. Mark has always been the most direct of the three of them, which is sometimes a gift and sometimes not. He said that 8 months was not enough time to really know someone. He said he worried I was still grieving and not thinking clearly. He said, and I felt this one land hard, that he wasn't sure Dad would have wanted this. Emily cried. She apologized for crying, which is very Emily. She said she was happy for me, she thought. She just needed a little time. She said she wished she could have met Ron before this. I told her she would meet him soon. I hung up the phone and sat in my living room in the quiet and tried to be fair to all of them. They loved their father. Of course they did. They had lost him suddenly and violently and without warning. And the grief of that was still with them, still woven into the fabric of how they saw our family. The idea of another man in their mother's life, in their father's place, as they probably experienced it, was a real thing to process. I understood that. I gave them that. But I also sat there and thought about something that I had never let myself think about fully before. I thought about what Dennis would actually have wanted. Not the sentimental version, not the version where he appears in a dream and gives his blessing and everyone cries and it's beautiful. The real version. The Dennis I had known for 31 years, who was practical above all things, who hated waste, who used to say that the only thing worse than a bad situation was staying in one you could leave. Dennis would not have wanted me to sit alone in a 2-bedroom house for the rest of my life, tending a garden and waiting for Sunday phone calls. I knew that with the same certainty I knew anything. He was not that kind of man, and ours was not that kind of love. The love we had was real, but it was never possessive. He would have grieved me, I believe, and then he would have gotten up and found a way to keep living. I deserved the same. I have never told my children this. I have let them hold the version of their father that they needed to hold. But that night, alone in my living room, I finally let myself hold the real one. 2 weeks later, I invited Ron to dinner at Christine's house. All 3 kids, all 3 spouses, a table full of people who were being very careful with each other. Ron arrived with flowers for Christine and a bottle of good wine and absolutely no agenda. He didn't try to charm anyone. He didn't over-explain himself or perform humility or work too hard to fill the silences. He just sat there and was himself, steady, warm, a little dry, genuinely interested in the people around him. He asked Mark about his work. He listened to Emily's stories about her kids. He didn't mention Dennis unless someone else did, and when Mark brought Dennis up at one point, Ron just nodded and said, "He sounds like he was a good father," and left it at that. Emily softened by the end of the evening. I could see it happen, gradual and almost imperceptible, like watching ice melt. She laughed at something Ron said near dessert and then looked slightly surprised at herself for laughing. Christine was cordial throughout. Christine is always cordial, but I couldn't fully read her. Mark was quiet. The kind of quiet that is not neutral. He called me the next morning. He said he needed to be honest with me. He said he had watched Ron all evening, and he seemed like a decent man. He wasn't saying otherwise. But 8 months, Mom. 8 months. How could I possibly know enough about someone in 8 months to make that kind of commitment? He said he'd done some thinking, and he needed me to hear this. If I went through with the wedding, he wasn't sure he could be there for it. I held the phone very still. I said, "Mark, I need you to think about what you're saying." He said he had thought about it. He said it wasn't an ultimatum, just honesty. I said I appreciated honesty, and that I had some of my own. I told him I would call him back. I called Ron. I told him everything Mark had said, all of it, without softening it. Ron listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's hard. I'm sorry." I said I didn't know what to do. He said, I think you do. I think you've known for a while." He paused. "Barbara, you've spent a lot of your life making decisions based on what other people needed. That's not a criticism. It's just what I've watched. And I'm asking you what you need. Not what your kids need. Not what Dennis would have wanted. What do you need?" I didn't answer right away, but I knew. I called Mark back that evening. I told him I loved him more than I could put into words, and that his feelings mattered to me, and that I understood where they were coming from even when I didn't agree. And then I told him something I had never said to any of my children before, because there had never been occasion to say it. I told him that I had spent 34 years putting this family first, that I had built my life around being a wife and a mother, and I had done it willingly, and I did not regret it, but that I was 61 years old, and my husband was gone, and my children were grown, and I had found something I hadn't expected to find, something that made me feel like myself in a way I couldn't fully explain, and I was going to choose it. I told him the wedding would be in June. I told him I wanted him there more than I could say. And I told him that I would love him just the same whether he came or not. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "I'll think about it, Mom," and he hung up. The wedding was on a Saturday morning in June. Ron's backyard, the one with the porch where he had proposed. We had strung lights in the trees the evening before. Patty had arranged flowers from her own garden, big, loose arrangements of peonies and white roses that looked like something from a dream. There were 14 people total. Christine was there. She stood next to me before the ceremony and held both my hands and said, "You look really happy, Mom." And I said, "I am." And she said, "Okay, that's what matters." Emily was there with her husband and their 2 little ones, who ran around the yard during the vows and had to be gently retrieved. She cried again, but this time it was different. I could feel the difference. Mark was not there. I noticed his absence the way you notice a missing tooth with your tongue. I kept coming back to it. Before the ceremony, during it, at the small reception afterward. It was a specific kind of hurt, quiet and persistent. I let myself feel it without trying to make it mean something it didn't. He was not ready. That was the truth. It wasn't that he didn't love me. Ron and I danced in the backyard after dinner, just the 2 of us, to a song playing from someone's phone propped against a flower pot. We weren't very good. We never have been. But we moved together anyway, and the lights were in the trees, and Patty was laughing at something behind us, and I thought, this is real. This is actually my life. The 3 months since the wedding have been ordinary in the best possible way. Ron and I are still learning each other's rhythms. He likes the television louder than I do. I like the windows open at night, and he finds it too cold. He drinks his coffee black and watches the morning news, and I take mine with too much cream and prefer the radio. We have already had 2 real arguments, not fights, but the kind of honest disagreements that happen when 2 fully formed people try to share a space and a life. Both times we found our way through it. I think that matters. Some mornings I wake up and for just a second, half asleep, I forget where I am. And then I remember. And I feel something settle in my chest. Something that is not excitement, not relief, but something steadier and more durable. I feel like a person who made a choice and is living inside it. About 3 weeks ago, my doorbell rang on a Tuesday afternoon. I wasn't expecting anyone. It was Mark. He was standing on my front porch with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking slightly uncertain in a way I had not seen on his face since he was a teenager. He said, "I was in the area. "Is this an okay time?" I said, "Of course, come in." Ron was home. He gave Mark a nod and said it was good to see him, and then excused himself to his workshop out back, which I thought was exactly right. And Mark and I sat down in the kitchen where I had made Sunday dinners for decades, and I poured us both coffee, and we sat across from each other. He didn't apologize directly. Mark has never been someone who apologizes directly. But he sat there, and he drank his coffee, and he asked how things were going. He asked about the house, about Ron's garden, about whether I was still going to the dance class on Wednesdays. He asked small questions, one after another, in the careful way of a man who is trying to show you something without being able to say it outright. After a while, he said, "You really do seem happy, Mom." I said, "I am." He nodded. He looked at his coffee cup, and then he said, very quietly, "I'm sorry I wasn't there." It was not a long apology. It was 4 words. But from Mark, 4 words like that cost something real. I reached across the table and put my hand over his, the way I used to when he was small and upset and didn't want to talk about why, and I said, "You're here now." We sat there for another hour. Ron came in eventually, and the 3 of us talked, awkwardly at first, and then less so. When Mark left, he shook Ron's hand at the door. It was a real handshake, brief but real. I watched him walk to his car. I watched him drive away. I stood at the door for a moment before I closed it, feeling the November air on my face, and I thought about everything that had led to that moment. The dance class, and the Wednesday evenings, and the porch in October, and the phone calls, and the dinner at Christine's, and the wedding in June, and all the ordinary mornings since. All of it. The whole improbable chain of it. I am 61 years old. I know that is not old, though there are mornings when my knees have a different opinion. I know I have time ahead of me, though I also know, more clearly than I did at 30 or 40, that time is not a thing you can count on. What I know, more than anything, is this. I spent a long time being defined by my relationships to other people. Daughter, wife, mother. Those are real things. They mattered, and they still matter. But somewhere in the grief of losing Dennis, somewhere in the quiet of that small house with its front porch and its garden, I found out that there was still a Barbara underneath all of it. A woman with her own preferences and her own fears and her own capacity for joy that had nothing to do with who needed her. Ron didn't give me that. I had it already. He just happened to show up at the moment I was finally ready to use it. My children did not give me permission to live my life. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. I love them, and I wanted their blessing, and their absence would have hurt me, does hurt me in the case of Mark and that June morning. But I did not wait for their permission. I am not sure why we teach women somewhere along the way that they need to wait for permission. From their parents, from their husbands, from their children when they grow up. The chain of seeking approval just gets longer, and you get shorter. And one day you realize the life you were waiting to live has mostly already happened. I'm not waiting anymore. On Wednesday evenings, Ron and I still go to the dance class at the community center. We are marginally better than we were 2 years ago. Marginally. Patty sits in the corner and critiques our footwork with an expression of loving contempt that I have known and treasured for 20 years. Last week, after class, the 3 of us went to the diner around the corner. The same diner where Ron and I had sat for 2 hours that first evening in May, learning each other over bad coffee. We ordered pie. We talked about nothing important. The diner was warm and bright, and outside the windows the November night was cold and dark. Ron reached over and touched my hand on the table. Just briefly. The way you touch someone when you want them to know you're glad they're there. I thought about Dennis. I thought about the 31 years and the big house and the children we raised and the dinner table silences and the things we never quite figured out and the ones we did. I thought about him reaching for a box of cereal on an ordinary morning and all the time we did not get. And I thought about this diner, this pie, this man, this November, this second, unlikely, completely unplanned chapter of a life I thought was mostly written. It wasn't a betrayal. It was a continuation. I know that now. It took me a while to know it, but I know it. I think Dennis would have known it too.